So yeah, I was invited by FARI and this initiative to give a small talk about data in the city, and in particular transparency and also the data walks. I'm Michiel. I work for the Knowledge Center Data and Society. Very short, who are we? We are the central hub for legal, societal, and ethical aspects of data-driven applications, and also AI because it's based on large amounts of data. We are part of the Flemish AI plan, and I'm also part of EMEC Smit from the VUB, Free University of Brussels. So to start off, a little bit of background on the data walks. So one of the projects, it was a FWO project that two colleagues of mine did in collaboration with the Christian University, the Catholic University of Leuven. And they did the Spectre project. A part of that was the workshops, they called it. And it was, mainly going with citizens, but very different groups, going through the city and asking their opinion on different ways that data is collected. It was a very large project, spanning, I think, 3 or 4 years, and it was very successful. A second aspect, or a background aspect, was the transparency engine. It was one of the first projects that I worked on with colleagues, of course. And it was, the background was that we combined research that we did over the past years inside of Smith, but also IMEC in general, sorry. And the key takeaways were different forms of transparency are needed for different stakeholders. And to convey that transparency, you need also different tools to inform those different stakeholders. So first of all, the different forms of transparency for different stakeholders. We did this, well, there was a project that created persona, and they did in-depth research about what different people need for transparency needs. So, for example, a visitor in the city wants to know which data is used, why does it, is my privacy safe, and what's in it for me. These visitors, they don't need to know which algorithms that are being used or technical things, because oftentimes you get adverse effect. If you bombard them with technical details, they'll probably be more declined, like, oh, I don't trust this because I don't understand it. So the key thing is to convey the information in an understandable and very low-key way. On the other side, you have people or a group like DPO, Digital Privacy Officers, and they want to know the technical details often. So they want to know which software is being used, for example, in cameras, who has access to the camera footage. Is it only police? Is it also like private partners? And yeah, all things around that. So yeah, here we have an example of a persona. This is Bernadette, and she's a visitor in the city. And I think we made 10 to 15 different personas, which also makes it very difficult to convey which type of privacy information that you relay to people. So different tools to inform different stakeholders. This is an example. So also in the study, we suggested different tools. This is an example for dashboards. The one on the right with all the colors is from London. The other one is from Dublin. And here you can see, especially in the one from London, it's a lot of information, not a lot of information about what all the numbers are and all the data is. This is a very good dashboard, for example, people who are technical savvy, like DPOs or programmers. But if you convey this information to a visitor, they don't know what they're looking at. Yeah, voila. So yeah, that's very important. Another tool that we mapped was the algorithm or data register. For example, Amsterdam and Helsinki have this. It's a public website. So this is an example of automated parking control. They give information, what it does, what it is, and also contact information. And then on the bottom, you have information about the data sets, what type of processing is being done, what steps are being taken to be non-discriminatory. So yeah, this is a very good example. I checked because the study that we did is from, I think, 4 years ago already. And since then, the register isn't updated that much. So I can't tell you if it's a success or if it's being used by people who live there or visitors. But personally, I found this a very good example of a tool to convey transparency. Then a tool that we created inside of Emacs Smith. It was for a project from City Flows of iMac. And it's called the Tech Cards. You can see two iterations here. On the bottom was the alpha. And then on the right, you see version, I think, 4 already. And we did a lot of iterations, a lot of studies with interest groups, how to best convey the information that we want to give them. So combining the two, we came to the data walks. What is a data walk? Yeah, Leah already gave an overview. So inside the data walks, we combined the insights from the Spectre workshop and the tech cards. And we with the Knowledge Center, but also FARI and other partners are giving data walks to everyone that is interested to learn about data in the city that is being collected, that is being used, and also processed. Why is it important to do data walks? Yeah, there are a lot of reasons to do them, but mainly it's like to create awareness, but also to let citizens and everyone interested participate in co-creation of policies in the smart city. So if a government asks like, can we install this kind of technology? It's very important that people who vote on it are informed about what the technology does and what the positive and also negative effects are. With the Knowledge Center, we did also a lot of data walks with very diverse groups. It could be senior citizen associations, DPO organizations for the Flemish government, but also trader organization associations and organizations. For example, we did one data walk with all people, the shopkeepers and hotels and cafes in a city, with the question of the DPO. Okay, this is the data that we have collected. This is this part of the data is open source. Can you think of ways how we can use this data in a positive way to enhance the way that visitors visit your shop and buy stuff? Because the data walks were a very big success and we're a fairly small team, well, at the Knowledge Center, We created also the data walk manual and data source cards because we got so many requests that we couldn't keep up. And then, if we wanted to, we could do multiple data walks a week. But yeah, what's special about the manual is that you can make your own data walk. So it's a very detailed manual that you can, all the steps needed to create your own data walk with maps and all that kind of stuff. But very important also are our data source cards. And it's every data source that we have mapped until now, we made a card of it. So on the left side, you can see the front. And then on the back side is like a small cheat sheet for the guide giving the data walk. And it contains information. What is the technology? How is it used? And which data is collected? And if applicable, which laws does it adhere to? The QR code is a QR code to the English version of our website, so you can have take a look at the PDFs. They're all free and downloadable. I think, that's it. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much. I think we'll keep the questions for the end of the presentations. So I'll invite Jonathan to do his presentation, but Michiel, you need to stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Let me share mine now. I think we're good there. Okay, hello. My name is Jonathan Pichot, or Jonathan Pichot, like everyone introduced me as. I am product lead for this organization called Helpful Places. We're based in Toronto, but we work with cities all around the world. And today I'll talk to you about an open source standard that we steward and we've deployed all over. And I think it really echoes already a lot of what Michiel talked about. Very excited for this discussion. But to start, I want to start with some larger context setting to give some assumptions that we have. This is probably an assumption that I hope most would agree with, that data collecting technology is now deeply embedded into our built environment. The most common example that we see is the CCTV camera. It's almost come to be banal, essentially. It's quite recognizable. Its presence might evoke different kinds of emotions, fear of Big Brother, to feelings of security or protection. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other sensors, and we talk about data collecting technology to sort of also capture sensors that may not be collecting private information, even though that often is what people will respond to the most. So there's, of course, traffic sensors, trash, how full a trash can is, or air quality, weather, that kind of thing. But of course, we also know that the sophistication of these technologies are increasing rapidly. And we're surrounded by high quality sensing, computation, and the public is vaguely aware of this at different levels. And if they were even more aware, I'm sure they would have more questions and thoughts. And these data walks, I think, are a great example of where I'm sure a lot of those come out. And none of this is theoretical, right? We're seeing this happen in real time. Paris and the Olympics and all over the world, authorities are moving forward with deployments of systems, and these systems are causing a lot of debate. So let's put those technological deployments in the context maybe of cities and the history of urban planning. We think at Helpful Places, we'll call urban technology is what we call generational infrastructure. Cities have always been the site of massive technological changes. It's where those technologies get deployed at scale and they reshape daily life. And that's what we mean by generational infrastructure. The choices we make right now in the deployments of technology will have impacts over a long time. It fundamentally changes the way a city works. Here's an example of Kansas City in the United States. Big neighborhoods were destroyed to build highways in the 1950s. those neighborhoods tended to be neighborhoods that were on the poorer and side of things. Those neighborhoods have not necessarily always even recovered. The echoes of this infrastructure is still today. So try to put that into context when we're thinking about the deployment of digital technology in cities. But the nature of digital technology, or let's say data collecting technology, is that it is invisible, or much less visible than building a new skyscraper or tearing down a neighborhood for a highway. And we have to think about it in making the way in which we make decisions on how it's built. We have to think about how it's invisible and hard for people to grasp. It's hard to have a debate about because it's not as physical. But it shapes the city nonetheless, and it might shape it in less tangible ways, but just as significantly. And how does it shape a city? It shapes a city through data, because data is the fuel of decision making. Quite literally, data informs decisions. It feeds optimization algorithms that have certain parameters. It quite literally colors maps. And again, taking some American history, this is a map of Los Angeles that has its red lines. This was a racist policy also in the 1950s, where banks would determine who they would lend to, or certain rates based on parts of the makeup of certain neighborhoods. And if we think about the data that's produced, we have to think about the ramifications of that data and how that data echoes into the future and burrows itself into the decision-making systems of our public authorities. This is sort of to give context of how we're thinking about that. So we need ways to make this generational infrastructure and the data and the decisions it produces transparent, meaning it needs to come out of the shadows. We need to make it visible. Unlike a construction site, people don't immediately see that's there. We need to make it legible. So they might see it's there, but how do people understand the purpose of that technology? How do they have an ability to reason and make trade-offs and understand the benefits and the negatives of a deployment of digital technology? And then it needs to be accountable to the intended outcomes and to the actual outcomes of that data, of that technology that was then deployed. And so that people are empowered to be part of that public debate. In urban planning, we've built a number of best practices now, given our past, of how do we engage a community on the questions of deployment, or not deployment, but construction of new urban infrastructure. How do we do that? And how do we build best practices around the deployment of data collecting infrastructure? It's quite still a bit vague. But design offers us a few interesting tools. And I love the echo, again, of the previous presentation that we'll just get into. First of all, visual languages help make concepts universally accessible. They're a tool for communicating things consistently and clearly. There are standardized ways of communicating it visually. And there are a number of examples of visual languages that I'm sure you've already encountered today, walking around your neighborhood or your house. They help us quickly understand what is being communicated. They can communicate without words across cultures and languages. They can convey complex ideas by layering visuals together. And we use them every day. We already use them, often when we don't even realize it. Those are visual languages. We think it's an interesting tool to have. There's also structured information, which helps people understand how something works. They help make decisions between different options that we might have in our daily life. They help us understand trade-offs of a particular element that we might be comparing. So where are we at the moment in trying to make this digital infrastructure more concrete, more transparent, more legible? So there are a number of laws that exist in municipalities around the world, again, mostly for CCTV cameras. That is our good old friend. It's perhaps the closest we have to a visual language at the moment, though the way it's displayed is still going to be inconsistent across jurisdictions. And besides notifying, there's no clear way, for example, in this sign to know, okay, but is the video stored or is it just live? And if it is stored, for how long? Who can see it? Who might eventually have access to it? Are the images run through some sort of image recognition software? All questions this sign doesn't answer. And of course, that's always not to put aside all the other technology that I'm sure is deployed in this neighborhood, that it remains invisible. So in all this, what are we working on? We're working on this open source standard we call Digital Trust for Places and Routines. And the goal of this standard is to make the data collecting technology in the public environment transparent, legible, and accountable. DTPR was born in 2019 over several co-design sessions that took place around the world between both experts in privacy, smart cities, tech, and the public realm, as well as the public around working groups. And the first version was an attempt to sort of find consensus between the major questions experts would have and the major questions the public would have. And what does it look like? It's a visual language that can be organized into structured information. In my intro there. So it starts with a taxonomy of elements in different categories, and these elements are put together to create the definition of a piece of technology. So from who is accountable, the city of Brussels or a private vendor, to the purpose of it, to the type of technology, the data that's used, how it's processed, where it's stored, how long it's stored, etc. Each of these elements has a title. They also have a description. And we have a growing list of elements on our website at dtpr.io as new technologies evolve, as we encounter new purposes or all sorts of, when we encounter this to the real world, there's always things to change. We've already translated into a number of different languages. I think it's 5 now. I'll show you some examples of that in just a bit. And when we put all these elements together, we create what we call a data chain. The data chain is the structured information. And that data chain tells the story of a particular piece of infrastructure, right? So who is responsible, intended purpose, technology used, data produced, who has access, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just the beginning. When we think about the structured information, we're already starting to realize there is a need to also display people's rights in regard to this piece of technology. I think the legal scheme in Europe that already exists around GDPR and the role of DPOs is very interesting to be able to allow people to immediately respond to say, okay, my right in relation to this camera is that I can ask the DPO to have this deleted or to have more information. So how do we make that clear? We also want to think about how we make clear the direct outcomes of that data collection. So I say, okay, this air sensor or this weather sensor is tracking something, and I can also see through the data that's been collected that we've saved this amount of water. So that's, again, trying to make that more concrete between the intended outcome and what's actually happening. So once we've described a piece of technology using DTPR, we've built our data chain, how do we tell people about it? So using the 4 primary questions that during our sessions with the public that they had of a piece of technology. So what is its purpose? Who put it there? Can I be seen? That's an interesting question they had. And how do I learn more? We try to extract the elements in the data chain that answer those questions as quickly as possible. So an accountability, who's responsible, the purpose of this technology, a way to give feedback, and the technology type. So what does this look like in the real world? It looks like signage at the moment. Signage that we put next to technology or in the entrance to areas where there might be technology deployed. And we encourage our partners to put those to answer those primary 4 questions in that signage. This is signage that was at the Sydney Olympic Park during the Women's World Cup. And then if someone goes up to a piece of signage, here is a sticker we had deployed in Angers, you scan a QR code that takes you to the full data chain. And it's really interesting. I also appreciated how Michiel talked about the challenge of the layers of information for different types of users. And this is something we think about, and we definitely need to get better at and clear. But the idea that we don't want to hide anything so that the person who is a persona who would be skeptical and want to know and perhaps technical, so that it's clear enough that we're not hiding something, but then for someone who just wants to understand, am I being recorded or not, that there is a visual indicator in public space that they see, oh no, in fact, you're not, or yes, you are, or whatever level of information they want. So it's something we're thinking about. It was really great to hear that echoed. So we've deployed this sort of all around the world. This project here, we deployed in Angers, Loire Métropole, at a new public place. There were about 8 technologies that they had there. With the University of Angers, we did some intercept surveys of about 400 people, and the response was very positive, much more positive than we or even the partners expected, with about 75% of people saying they would have loved to see the signage become permanent and deployed across the city. And as we've noticed, a lot of, and why we talk about data collecting technology larger than just privacy, sort of like cameras, is that, for example, here there were a number of technologies meant to help with trash pickup, efficiency of water use, lighting and power efficiency. And when people were explained what these technologies were doing, their satisfaction towards those public services markedly increased. And it went from like, oh, there's just technology around me, to say, oh, I'm really happy that the city is not wasting water here. Really interesting feedback. In Charlotte, North Carolina, United States, we did some in-depth focus groups with people who hadn't encountered DTPR, hadn't encountered these technologies, and got some very interesting feedback, particularly around knowing who is responsible, right? So this was a quote from one of the people in the focus groups saying they now understood who you were and what you were up to. And it's very true that sort of, that when it's unclear, it adds to that feeling of distrust, and that there's just things around me that I don't know what's going on. As I mentioned, we've also translated a number of languages. This is in Long Beach, California, where our signage was in Khmer, the language of Cambodia, in Filipino, in Spanish, as well as in English, to be able to communicate to all the communities that lived in that city. And this is a project we had here in Miami on the Underline. And this was where we're noticing a lot of innovation districts really appreciating how DTPR can provide a similar visual language as they deploy technology and new technologies throughout their innovation district. So you have one visual language, and as you deploy new technologies, users, people, citizens can see and understand immediately, oh, this technology is connected to this authority. I've seen this before. I understand what's going on. We're also exploring what it means to sort of use this as a platform. So we know there was a big movement of open data in the last maybe 10, 15 years now in municipalities. And as we're seeing regulations being created, Michiel also showed, for example, the algorithm registers that are really interesting. We're wondering if there is a place for a transparency platform where we don't want to like put signage all over the city for every single sensor. So how do we put things in one place where people are able to see where sensors are deployed, and the way that the data that's created by those sensors end up in algorithms, in AI models that end up making decisions? How do we sort of give that whole life cycle of the creation of the data, the storage, the use, and the decisions that come from it? Something we're thinking about. As I said, we've deployed sort of all over 3 continents now. So to wrap up, I think I'm a little over time here. We found that deploying DTPR improves the transparency of these deployed technologies. It makes the invisible visible, but CCTV signs do that too. So we've also found that DTPR makes these technologies legible, empowering them to have the conversation about its use. We build trust with that common visual language. We educate residents and try to create or start to begin creating those feedback loops between those public authorities and the people in the cities. We also find that deploying DTPR builds alignment within the public authorities themselves. So maybe you're surprised, or you wouldn't be surprised, but when you deal with technology in public space, there are often a lot of different silos within a given public authority that are responsible. Everyone who's responsible to put the sign or the sensor there versus the person responsible for using the data, et cetera, et cetera. Even in Angers, for example, we identified sensors that our team didn't even know were deployed because it was a whole other agency that had deployed this. So clearly there needs some sort of regulatory and better internal alignment. And using DTPR has been a good lever in beginning that conversation internally. So finally, to wrap up, to put this all in focus, This is what we sort of see as the urban technology lifecycle, from the planning of a smart city project, the procuring of that project, the deployment, the data collection of technology, the analysis and decision-making based on the data produced by that technology, and then the projects and policies that come out of that. DTPR's current focus, we had to start somewhere, is really more on the deployment and the data collection moment of this life cycle. But we really know that we want to go and grow in both directions. Is it DTPR as a standard? Is it a whole network of other kinds of best practices? I'm not sure. But we know, for example, that we want to start working on privacy-first procurement requirements for smart city projects. How do you get that conversation happening much earlier in the project lifecycle? Often this is something that's just done afterwards as a sort of comms or marketing element. It needs to be fundamental to the smart city project. How do we maybe create DTPR-enabled or labeled IoT sensors? We know IoT vendors really enjoy or very, very excited about this standard because they, for example, might have built a sensor that is privacy by design, but when you put it in public space, it still looks like a camera. How do people trust that, in fact, there is no video being recorded? How do they differentiate themselves in the market as a privacy-first vendor? And on the other side, how do we highlight the outcomes better? We say, okay, we wanted to save water. Did we save water? Did this technology actually do that? And we're definitely paying attention to a lot of the AI and algorithm registers that are happening that we feel is sort of the next step in, again, that whole data life cycle from the collection, the decision-making, and the policies. And that's it. If you have more questions, please get in touch. We're on dtpr.io is the open source project. Helpful Places is the small organization that is deploying this around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now move to Maelle.
Yes, I'll just share my screen. It's okay with you? Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. Very happy to be with you. I hope the voice will still be with me because this morning was not so good. So I'm Maelle Fouquenet from Data Activist. Just a few words. It's a cooperative and we help the public sector opening data and algorithm. We work with national administration and local administration. I'm a senior consultant and as you said Snow earlier, I'm a specialist about gender issues in data and algorithm and about transparency of public algorithm. I'd like to speak about one particular project we did with Mon Diagnostic Artificialization. It's a startup, state-run startup in France. And afterwards, I will just say a few words about the research project we have at Data Activist about mediation and transparency of algorithm, because we have few things going on that. Mon Diag Artif, which is a nice little name for Mon Diagnostic Artificialization, which is very long to say when you say it like 10 times in a day. It looks like that. It's a website, and it's really a tool for visualization of the land consumption and artificialization. It's used by the public servant and the local urban planning offices to estimate how much they can consume in the few years to come in regard of what they did consume the last 10 years. So it's made with built on the data from the government institution, especially CEREMA, which is an expert about territorial urban planning, and INSEE, the National Institute of Statistics, and IGN, which is the National Institutes of Geography. These last ones, they build their data, for example, from satellites images, and they apply computer vision on it to be able to see what's on the images and to say, this is a land, this is a road, this is a house, this is a commercial area, blah, blah, blah. So that's how they make the data set for themselves. And that's one which is used by Mon Diagnostic Artificialisation. What they ask us when they came to us is really to make the data more comprehensible. The land conception and the artificialization are quite difficult concept to understand. And they always have the same question coming over and over. So we had to work on that. What you have to know about that, it's a very political and sensitive subject. So it's very touchy. Everything we did, we had to ask for them to read it over, to make sure to ask the administration who would write the doctrine if it's on the right path or not, or it's very, very sensitive for the local administrations and the national, both. And the second point, it's always evolving. The legislation, is evolving through the time. So you start day one working with some legal frame, and maybe in a month it will change a little bit. But this little bit will change a lot for you on what you're doing. So you always have to be able to adapt. And obviously, it's a very technical subject, so that's a difficulty when you work on it. And there are a lot of disagreements still between experts on some definition. For example, what was really difficult to understand for me is how you count the forest or the private garden, even if it's a very big garden with a lot of trees. Maybe it's a private little wood or it's a forest. How do you count it? And at some point, they were exchanging together because they were discussing, and they were almost, I'm caricaturing, but they were almost like saying, maybe with the size of the leaves of the tree, you can determine, okay, really? Are we at that kind of detail, really? So it's just to make you understand how difficult it is to try to go really all the way to understand how they make the data. One problem on the website is like this graphic, for example. I don't understand it. And I'm not an expert on the subject, but I really thought I could understand like graphics, like as a data analyst, I'm usually not too bad for that. But really this one, wow. And when we did the panel, the experts of the subject, they were like, yes, it's very clear. So can you explain, because I don't understand? Well, yes, not so clear. Let me see. You see what I mean? So even if you have graphics, it's not always understandable. What we had to work on was the vocabulary also, because conception and artificialization are two different things, but it's very tiny, the difference sometimes. And after 4 months working on the subject, I was not really clear myself. Sometimes like, yes, I understand totally. Wait, let me check just to make sure, because I'm not sure actually what's the difference, because it is very close, but it's not the same. And legally, it's definitely not the same. And we're back on the political sensitive subject. We had many questions about the data production method, about the calculation methods, the graphics. Well, you saw one of the graphics. A lot of graphics were they needed more information or less information. And the result of the calculation from the website is sometimes different from the result from the local urban planning offices. And the local government, they don't understand why they have different results. And that's something that you can explain, because they don't use the same data for the sources, but you have to explain it. You have to be able to explain the differences. So we worked a lot about improving the understanding of the information and try to explain the data, the calculation, the statistical and the algorithmic processing. And for 4 months we worked. Well, the first question really was, who are you talking to? because they were not really clear if they wanted to address the local government, the expert, or the non-expert. And in local governments, like my city, 3,500 inhabitants, definitely there is no expert of artificialization in the city hall, probably not. So they have to understand the tool they are using and the result they get with that expert to explain them. So the vocabulary has to be accessible. They have to understand the data, the graphics, etc. To do that, we talked to a lot of people, and we started to build a FAQ, which seems obvious, but they didn't have one. And it's a very powerful and simple tool with a lot of work on the wording, actually, and the vocabulary, very, very long to do. We read a lot of technical documentation. We met the data producers. We had a lot of questions to the data scientists. We made focus group with experts and non-experts. And but we suggest modification, improvement, and sometimes deletion. The workshops, we did it online on Miro. It's a tool very funny to use. And we had two momentum. We first asked them the feedback about the FAQ we produced at first to improve it, and then feedback on the website. And we had a focus group with the experts and with the non-experts. And definitely, as Jonathan and Michiel said before, very different way to see things and very different information they needed because they didn't have the same level of expertise. We asked them to put like post-its and comments on different website pages to see what was going on and what was clear and what was not clear. What we learned about the project, four main things. First of all, to explain an algorithm is first to explain its data. It looks obvious, but sometimes it's not really clear or it's not made. And you need, to do that, you need really to meet the human behind the data, because for the data from the CEREMA, for example, or IGN, when you talk with the producers, you always have some information, side information, contextual information that are not in the documentation, like details, but it enlightens you and you see, you understand better how it works. And definitely graphics are key. You need to work on graphics. The second thing is to explain a public algorithm is to explain the law, which is not an easy part, because you have implementation in different, how to say that? Well, in codes, in decrees, in circulars, in other forms of legal doctrine. So you have to put all that together to find every pieces everywhere. You need to interpret, you need to adjust, you need to confront with the field observation to make sure it works. So this part is takes a long time, and it has to be carefully processed. Third thing, explaining an algorithm is very much easier if you use a format that people are familiar with, like the FAQ, for example. Explaining an algorithm, even if it's not a personal decision, it's always important. Like, for example, this one, mon diagnostic artificialization doesn't impact my personal life at first, but in fact, it is a tool for decision making for local government. And in that way, well, the government, when they decide to build a big housing area somewhere in my little city, well, it impacts me. So I want to know how they choose to do it here, to choose the size and everything. So I want that information. Sorry. So that's important for transparency and trust, to be able to explain what you're doing and how you do it. This is very the the 4 bullet points, I would say, about that project. Just few words and about the research project and that activist we have. Like my colleague who couldn't be there today, Lucella, is a researcher about algorithm and transparency and mediation. That's various topic, and is leading the action research project about that. And we have different projects inside. We are trying to push and to work on that. For example, we designed a workshop to try to open the black box of AI for public servant, as we work mainly for the public administration and public sector, but works with the general public too. We try to explain the major stages in the construction of an AI and its cycle life, and we want to do it in a fun way, interactive, where the participants are really involved, and they are doing it actually, and we help them. So this is a tool we have. We did last year published Cahier de l'Observatoire Data Publica about transparency of public algorithm. It's a tool for the public sector players, and we really want them to take back, I would say, the ownership of the subject of algorithm in their areas. And it's a practical guide, and there's a lot of history and legal background, and it's free, it's online, and we were really proud of that. And we did apply with the European Erasmus Plus project on mediation practices about algorithm to enforce the effective algorithmic transparency in Europe. And it's a project based on a work with the digital mediators in different countries of Europe. And well, we finger crossed. We're waiting for the answer on that one.
Thank you so much. I think for this last part of the session, of course, this will be the moment to ask your questions. I saw some of the questions were already posed on the chat, but don't hesitate to formulate them directly. Either hold up your hand or we'll send it in the chat. I would invite you as well to maybe turn on your camera, just to make it more of a discussion space. So don't hesitate to do so. No obligation, of course. But yes, maybe I can start with one of the first questions that were asked in the chat, I believe to Jonathan, if I understand correctly. It's coming from Françoise, and she doesn't really understand why you use the same picture if you keep data 1 year, 7 years, or in any other ways.
Yeah, good question. In the first version of the standard, the idea was that the only, let's say, editable icon is the one for the accountable organization. So you put the logo, let's say, of the city of Paris or the city of Brussels to be able to say they're responsible, and the rest of the icons are standardized. We could imagine icons that can be customized. For example, the question on how long data is kept. The challenge there is that those policies are going to vary massively, and so we'll eventually have an icon for every single number that you could imagine. So where we're at now is we're confronting this first version with reality, and so you've pointed already one of the challenges we've already encountered, which is that we've got all these different lengths of time, and eventually we want to sort of do another design process to find what is the next step. So you could imagine a design standard that says you can put a number the same way I showed the language around clothing temperature, right? We have a very clear sense of 30, 40 degrees, 50 degrees, something like that, where you'd have a standardized way. So again, the goal of the visual language is that you understand it very quickly. You're walking in a space, you see something, and you say, okay, this is very clear.
Thank you. I'm looking around. If they aren't, yeah, Antoine.
Yeah, thank you. For to raise my hand. So my name is Antoine. I'm a data analyst at BlaBlaCar. So it's a carpooling platform in France and a bit all around the world. And I had a question a bit for all of you. First, thank you for all of the three presentations. It was really clear and really insightful. My question was more on how do you see the collaboration between the private and the public sector into setting standard, into setting a transparency standard or technical standard to make sure that the data are clear and that they use the right way. In some case, the technology innovation are coming from the private sector, and then so they are leading the way in that way. But then the public sector comes afterward and then try to direct to see a solution to the technology. How do you see this collaboration happening to make sure that that the public and the private are able to collaborate together to make the best of the data usage for public services and public sector in general? I don't know if my question was clear.
I'll start if no one else. So in the case of DTPR, on the private side, we've already had a number of vendors, as mentioned, who are really interested in the standard. One vendor we spoke to said they had challenges because their sensors get vandalized, but it's also they're designed to be privacy by design. So how do they create that trust? And I think this is the problem. And I think there's even a little question kind of I'll make allusions to. But we know that there needs to be a conversation before, because right now we're just describing technology that's already out there, right? And so you can say, well, how am I supposed to opt out? How am I supposed to? And so I think if you think about private and public, it's getting the public sector, who usually are the ones managing public space. So again, just within the context of data collecting public space, to set procurement guidelines that then give the indications to the private sector. These are the things that we expect. So this is the way in which we want to be able to audit your technology. These are the kinds of technologies that we would accept in this procurement, and to also make that clear then to the public, right? So again, going to the metaphor of urban planning, we have processes in place already, best practices around the world of how we engage communities, of what are the kinds of things they want to see, how do they want their street to be designed. We need those kinds of processes at the beginning of procurement to say, okay, what is the kind of the trade-off that we're going to make with the data, these technologies that we're going to deploy in public space, so that we set them in correctly in procurement, and so that when it's then deployed, people aren't being responding of just like, it's kind of, we're still responding kind of reactive versus proactive. But I think that's where, at least in our field, where how we see working with the private and the public.
I don't know if I have much to add to it, but I wanted to iterate on the fact, like, the collaboration between private and public, it doesn't always have to be against each other. Like the example that I gave, that we did the data walk with the traders. A lot of them, small companies, they don't know which data is available and which is open source. So yeah, and well, we had a few particular cases that, the data is accessible to big companies, tech companies, and it creates a disadvantage to small players. So informing them, like, okay, this data is in a privacy-friendly way accessible, can also equal the playing field between large and small players. So yeah.
Before I take Alexander's question, I want to cite Adriana's question, which is, to know is important, but if you cannot influence decisions taken, transparency may not take away lack of trust. Any views on how to deal with this?
Can I respond? I think it's a very good way to look at things, but it's also a little deterministic, in my opinion. I think, okay, maybe it's yeah, the way you influence decisions taken is, for example, and very cliche, by voting. So with the Knowledge Center, we did like a voting thing that we asked all the parties how they stand on AI issues and data collection issues. That's one thing to inform people about the standpoint of parties. And wait, yeah, and for example, you can influence the way you participate in a few things. Well, of course, not everything, but for example, if you know about the implementations on Android and iOS with the location tracking, it's a new implementation. Do you want to share your location? If you inform people, they will say no. Also with data walks, like the tech card that I showed about sniffers and beacons, in a lot of big shopping malls, they use small beacons to tell where the most people pass through, and they influence the rate they charge for shops. So if more people pass through it, they charge more. But it only collects your MAC address, so MAC. It's nothing to do with Apple. It's your identifier code of your mobile device itself. But what a lot of people don't know is, well, it's privacy friendly, but what people don't know, and if you link it to data that, for example, Facebook has, if you install the Facebook app, they also have your MAC address. So if you combine every piece of data in data broker databases, then the privacy gets lifted. So yeah, maybe it can influence people not installing the app of Facebook, but only using like the mobile website. And it's these small things. Also pertaining to that, function creep. So the installation of ANPR cameras, the number plate recognition cameras, they're installed to deter speeding, but now they're also used to check for vehicles who aren't registered, or for like in the border with the Netherlands, with the coffee shops, to view like drug traffic. And yeah, so yeah, that's what we call function creep. And making people see that this is an option is also very valuable, we think.
Maybe I could say about the transparency and the way you can influence. Like in France, for example, for a few months now, there are some big cities that are leading citizen consultation about how they should implement AI in their administrations and in the relationship with the citizens. So one way to take part of the discussion is to go to participate on that consultation. But I understand that this is something that it is designed by the administration, so they can collect feedbacks and they can work with it to. So maybe it's just a part of the response for Adriana, but in the way you implement things, it's also a duty you have to take that on board at the beginning of the project. I mean, to have it on your mind at the beginning of the project, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just, one last thing. I think Maelle is a really good example of the kinds of things that we need to start be doing at the beginning of these projects. Which, right, once something is there, how do we respond? And I think what we're exploring too is how we can empower people to use their rights that they already have. and again, under the sort of European legal structure with the role of the DPO, and we've spoken to DPOs and they say we rarely get people's requests. Well, how might we actually be able to build a tool that puts it in someone's hand? You scan the QR code, you see the data chain, and you're able to contact that DPO right away. You don't have to find their information on the website, and to sort of really give people a hand on the rights that they already have, so that in after the fact, they can also influence decisions, because those DPOs have legal strengths. They have sort of, it's already defined. And so it's already a really powerful lever in people's response and relationship with these technologies.
Yeah, maybe if I may elaborate a little bit, I agree that, for example, things like privacy by design are very good principles, so that you create much more trust. I think transparency is very necessary, but it's really built on this privacy principle of being able to know, but being able to know is only half of the deal. And most people will not want to access all these data. They just want to be able to trust that things are okay and that their data are being processed in a good and reasonable way, and that they will have access only if they need, and a possibility to take action. So I think upfront, especially at the city level, there should be something like with citizens, agreed like a type of code or framework from within all AI processing or all tools used within the city, that that they are built with that framework in mind, so that you build upfront trust and in a process which is not only a legislative or election process that you choose your parties, but also where you have had a discussion with citizens, so that you come to agree a framework from which will then apply to all data collected and processed within your city.
Yes,
and that count also for the public sector, but also for private companies collecting data within a city.
It is happening actually. Like in Nantes, for example, in France, they wrote a code on the collection and the use of data of citizens. So they took engagement. Not sure that, but they did write something, and they will do the same for AI. So that kind of initiative at city levels are developing, at least in France, from what I know. They are developing a lot, and they are sometimes based on the citizen consultation I talked about before, and sometimes they are written before, and they can be improved by consultations or workshops or whatever. But they try to do it, yeah. For the private sector, I don't know. I wish they would.
Thank you. We have 10 more minutes. We're going to take Alexander's question. I also wanted to invite everyone, if you want to react on, of course, we would like to hear the answers of our speakers, but I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge amongst the people here, so don't hesitate to also contribute to the answers or the reflections.
Yeah. I have a few words about me to understand the context of my question. We are IT company Kitsoft with Ukrainian roots. Our focus is on government and smart cities. We create city digital services, and currently our products are used by more than 25 million people. And we are now moving to Brussels. Currently, we're members of Brussels-based startup incubator 7C. And our focus is on development of mobile application and work portals for cities and other communication services between government, business, and citizens. And my question to speakers is about, just to understand, we have a lot of services that consume user data, produce some user data, and we pay attention to privacy policy, so everybody understands how data is collected, and probably we even could add the DTPR approach to improve visual language. And my question to Jonathan is what are good examples of use in DDPR for digital services, specifically in mobile application?
That's a really good question, and we actually haven't yet worked on mobile applications. in the sense that we know that mobile, if what I'm understanding your question is, a mobile tool is going to also collect a bunch of information. What we have focused, since our partners have tended to be public authorities, are the kinds of sensors that they have deployed. So we haven't yet worked, for example, with telecoms that might have other particular pieces of information that come from a mobile device. So I'm not sure how much I can answer that question exactly. Besides where it's something I kind of want to, where there's often this sort of, in this debate, it can be helpful to be clear, is how there is the decision-making processes that in the end are sometimes the most important thing. So I think just it was Adriana who was speaking about how do those cities set those rules in place, and that is often a very non-technical, political, community type of process, into which then, for something like DTPR, we can embed in a way the results of that kind of conversation, to say, okay, so these are the kinds of technologies that we want in our city. This is the way that we want our data to be treated. This is how long we would want it to be stored. And really, DTPR acts as this sort of common language amongst those decision makers, the community, media, to say, okay, this is more tangible. That's sort of, if you take my talk of trying to make this infrastructure that is a lot less tangible than other kinds of infrastructure clear for people. And so a best practice to try to sort of answer your question is not so much like using DTPR in a particular way, but it's how the output of that community conversation comes to a decision, and then how all the actors, including your company, circle around that kind of decided way in which we're going to handle that information. We're going to, be in relation with users. We're going to store data, that kind of thing. I don't know if that answers your question a bit, but it's how sort of how we see the role of DTPR.
Yeah, thank you. And my next question is to Maelle. It's about openness of algorithm. So currently our system is based on local platforms, so we utilize BPMN notation. It's quite visual language, but it is understandable mostly for qualified users. So it's very hard to keep up to date all the documentation, of course, when you make about 100 different services and support it. So it costs a lot of money to support it, but still we do it. And what do you think? Is it worth to publish this BPMN notation, like schemes, because it is very synchronized with actual algorithms? Because if you're trying to produce videos or something, it could be then not up to date. When the service changed, and it's quite expensive to keep it up to date, all these visual materials. So possibly, is it worth? What is your thought on that? Is it worth to publish BPMN algorithms inside the services, so everybody could see it and interpret it and understand?
Well, my work is really about public algorithm, but algorithm in general, I would say. The thing we find is that publish an algorithm is never enough. It's not. In fact, it will be helpful just for a few people who can work with it, but the public, they can't do anything with it usually. So to be in a to be in a way to help for transparency, I think you have the algorithm on one side, but you have really all the materials around, like explaining where the data are from and how they are processed. This is very important too. And you need mediation to make people be able to use it and to understand what you're using and what you are doing with it and how you work and what is the result of it. So I'm not sure I fully respond to your answer. I hope I give you some tips or two thoughts. But just the algorithm or technical documentation will never be enough, because yes, you will publish something, but if the public is not able to understand what you're publishing, well, it's like you did nothing. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
I see that the time is running out. I think we can ask one last question, which is opening up an entire field of debate, I think, but maybe there are already a few keys that we can exchange on. And it's related to consumption of data. So it says, for different kinds of infrastructure, such as water and electricity, many solutions are pushing to consume less. Is this something we can encourage for data as well, and in which ways? So if there are any interesting keys that we can already take with us.
Well, it's a subject for the public sector. It's a subject on the table right now for a lot of administrations. We didn't find, I think, yet the good way to deal with it, but the question is very in everybody's mind. We are dealing between, we need to collect and consume less data, but on the other end, we need to be able to have the good data to be able to take the good decision. So maybe there's a work about the indicators you need to build, like for example, and to a reflection about how long you need to keep the data also, because there's a question of storage too. But it's a work in process, really, I think.
I think it leads to really interesting questions about, and again, trying to help people think about trade-offs, to say, are people willing for perhaps less efficiency for less collection of data, making certain processes still analog versus not, given a society's understanding of their priorities. And I think that's, it's hard to say that there's any sort of best practice there, besides the fact that democratic societies are going to come to sort of different conclusions around a lot of those trade-offs.
For example, just maybe to add a little point, I work on gender issues, and we are missing gender data a lot in a lot of fields for public policies. So we would need to collect more data. So how do you deal, with we need to collect more data for that topic, but in general, we would like to collect less. So that's not easy question, I think.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was very inspiring to see the very difficult task of translation. I mean, there are already a lot of initiatives. How do you translate them correctly to the different levels? It was definitely very inspiring to hear all of the different initiatives happening. It is, like you said, the beginning of a process. So I think moments like these are very important on how, like, meeting and encouraging each other to find ways of making this data more visible and therefore hopefully more democratic. Thank you again. If you have any more questions, I guess you can still get in touch with our speakers. We'll see if we share the presentations. It's not been decided yet, but in case it is, we'll share it with you, of course. And we invite you to follow our, we'll have another sequence of activities within this cycle of debates. But beginning of 2025. So be patient and see you next year. Or come to activities, of course, at Brussels Academy or FARI. Have a lovely summer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good day.